basically something you walked into the kitchen and you're like, I hope we don't become dudes someday. And talking about there's so many dudes. And these dudes are people like Muji or Eckhart Tolle or
David Hawkins,
Bashar,
Alan
Abraham
Watts,
Hicks,
Krishnamurti.
Anyone who's just known as a, you could say, spiritual speaker, someone who has written many kind of self-help books or those kind of insightful things.
Tom Robbins, Wayne Dyer, the list goes on. It's like, it's an endless list.
And the stories we're making, people can learn from them, but we're breaking the paradigm so that it's not just kind of a book separated, like, okay, you have fiction, not books, and then you have books about like living life.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, can I have a story that infuses that, and so I can read something cool and get all that stuff that I would get out of that anyway? And like most of the time, it is their, well, a lot of the time they have some kind of story, but then they have the lessons after, and it's like, we always talk about how stories end, and then it's like, well, then the story actually begins, because that's when you learned a lesson, you learned something. So just like the self-help book came after they learned something.
Yeah,
basically we have a story that starts when they've learned.
It's like the story happens, they learn a lesson, and then growth will begin, and the change will happen, and like the important stuff, basically life and what comes of what you've learned is now a story, and it's ditched. So we're just trying to do the other side. And this whole dudes thing, like, I hope you don't become dudes, is like, there's so many throughout history, and there always will be, that we don't need anymore. It's not a thing that the world needs, like, and not in the sense of like we need to have the world saved somehow, so a bunch of like spiritually stuff is gonna save it or something. But like all the way from, you know, way before Jesus and Buddha, all the way up to, you know, way in the future, there's always going to be a collection, a massive collection in the present time and in from the past of people who you can look to for really niche, weird things like Terence McKenna, to people who've like revolutionized the way spirituality works in the entire country, like when Yogananda came over to North America, all sorts of things like that. That's going to be everywhere all the time. And that is not our place in this, because of the way we're trying to approach things, and our skill sets and stuff cater to a certain atmosphere almost, that we want to do that thing where we have stories that have life force in them, like the stuff that all the dudes talk about how to like live fully and all this stuff can be in stories, because there are lives that happen all the time that have this as a part of them. So we want to write fantasy novels, like the same typical fantasy novels or fantasy stories, movies, everything, like fiction tales that are made up with fictional characters, cool worlds, all sorts of crazy stuff, give us the dragons and whatever else, but life is infused into it. That's it.
In a simple example, you could take like someone's struggle with something, say in life, in a self-help book. Like I was just reading something, and I can't think of the actual example, but it's like something they learned from life in a self-help book where they've described, you know, their own personal experience or whatever, right? A lot of our things in stories might be a little more prone to that, instead of like, oh, a great event happens, whatever, but it's more like, it's a lot of speculation or learning just because learning happens, and I don't even know if I wanted to go there actually when I started saying it. It's a little, maybe too much stuff, really.
Like fiction and fantasy novels, just stories in general, are this very unsaturated thing. Like we've yet to even dip into fiction at all in terms of what it could do, and that's what we want to
explore.
Yeah, and it helps us as well. Like stories are dudes for us writing this Lantern Valley project and like this crazy stuff we're doing. That's our spiritual self-help book guide teacher dude, like all the dudes.
I've said before, it's like my greatest spiritual therapy is making these stories.